who took a stand in opposition of the government was safe. Back then, many of us witnessed the civil rights struggles of the 60s, the assassination of JFK, RFK, Martin Luther King, the eruptions and riots in the inner city, the war against black liberation movements, and the bloody suppression of protesters at the Chicago Democratic Convention in 1968. But it was May 4th, which was the watershed moment for me. My decision to go to law school came to a head after Kent. I wanted to be part of the movements for social change. I wanted to use law to help those movements and to confront the inequities, the injustices, and the oppression of those shut out of the American dream. That was a tall order, but most of you remember, during that time, optimism was the only way to think, and idealism is also the rule of the day. There was no such thing as cynicism back then. We were going to change the world before we reached 30, obviously. And we still are fighting to change the world. But coming out of the 60s was also an exciting time of political and social upheaval. Revolution of conscience, a passion for change, from music to film to art, and the inclusion of women, LGBT, and of course people of color. I even went to Woodstock and fed into that spirit of the times, something I'll never forget. Everything about the norms during that period was questioned, and with a sense of urgency. The Black Power movement educated us about policing and its role as oppressors in the black community, and the advancement of self-determination as a path forward. As police departments and the FBI set out to destroy or neutralize movements for social change under J. Edgar Hoover, another despicable human being, with his sinister COINTELPRO program, spying and sending provocateurs into our ranks to destroy our movements. The same year as May 4th, I started law school at Cleveland State. What I saw was not good. It became clear that law school was an instrument of those who wanted to train obedient students to fall in line with the status quo. Corporate control, focusing on property rights as opposed to human rights. Law schools, including my own, are run by myopic and rigid men who ignore the dramatic shift in challenging norms. We pushed for more relevant curriculum and demanded new leadership. We used federal work study money for student internships to work in the progressive community and even represented those arrested for anti-war protests. As a student, I went down to Athens, Ohio in the summer of 1972 to help defend the Athens 77, students who occupied the ROTC building at Ohio University after the mining of Haiphong Harbor. But it was not just law students, but activists from many backgrounds and disciplines working together. We all understood that law is only one tool to advance justice, but to understand that the power of social movements actually worked. Not because of the law or lawyers. We are on tap, not on top, Eugene used to tell me, but the commitment of those who risk their lives and the future for what they believe in. So while most law school graduates were looking for jobs as commercial lawyers, or prosecutors, or working for insurance companies, I went out to South Dakota, taking on the call for progressive lawyers to join the American Indian movement in the aftermath of the occupation of Wounded Knee on the Pine Ridge Reservation, where the corrupt tribal government was handing over rich mineral rights, leasing uranium mining to major energy companies, and threatening the desecration of the holy Black Hills. The occupation of that little hamlet of Wounded Knee, when in 1890, 300 men, women, and children were massacred by the 7th Cavalry, led to a 71-day standoff with the U.S. Army and U.S. Marshals, resulting in the killing of 2 Indians and 1 U.S. Marshal. And lawyers from across the country volunteered to work on that case. Imagine that happening today. After passing the bar, I went back to Cleveland and set up an office, taking on whatever cases I could find. And my first lawsuit was against the FBI. For those of you who live in Cleveland, I don't know if you remember the Black Unity House, led by my brother, Brother Diablo, who later became an activist Muslim leader. The Black Unity House was a proud, culturally impacted the community and provided opioid addiction treatment for the community. The FBI didn't like that because they walked around in uniforms and carried rifles. They raided the Black Unity House, took all the rifles, I sued the FBI and won, got the rifles back. But in the process, I got my FBI file. And it was clear that they were watching me. I don't know why they were. So over the next few years, I continued to go back and forth to South Dakota, working on one of the cases involving 300 prosecutions from a wounded knee, where the government used the H-Rap-Brown Act, which was a law that was later found to be unconstitutional, that allowed for the prosecution of those who crossed state lines to engage in a civil disorder. And there were trials in Lincoln, Nebraska, Sioux Falls, South Dakota, and Minneapolis. Later, I was honored to be part of the legal team for Leonard Peltier, who was charged with killing 2 FBI agents on the Pine Ridge Reservation in 1976. That's a long story, but that was another product of COINTELPRO. Pine Ridge Reservation back then was an armed camp with FBI agents constantly